I gave up a thriving career in Chicago to return to Springfield, solely because of a promise and for the woman I loved. 7 years later, my father-in-law's small construction company had transformed into an empire, and he, once on the brink of bankruptcy, had become a millionaire revered by the business community. But at the gala honoring him that night, amid the applause and dazzling lights, I realized something that perhaps everyone else knew except me. I had never been considered a member of the Langston family. I was merely a tool to help them build their wealth. But when they decided to cast me aside, they forgot one crucial thing: that the person who helped them rise could also bring their entire empire crashing down. Hello, my name is Braxton Cole. If you had asked me 10 years ago what my life would be like, I would have laughed and told you about million-dollar deals, sleepless nights analyzing markets, or handshakes with financial titans in Chicago. That was my world, a world of numbers, strategies, and grand dreams. But life, as I've come to realize, never quite follows the plan. And the story I'm about to tell isn't about what I achieved, but about what I sacrificed and what I learned when everything seemed to fall apart. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, in an ordinary middle-class family, not wealthy but comfortable. My father, a mechanic, always told me, "Braxton, a person's worth lies in what they create, not what they inherit." Those words etched themselves into my mind, becoming the guiding principle for every decision in my life. I studied hard, graduated with honors from the University of Chicago, and quickly carved out a place for myself in a top-tier investment firm. By the age of 25, I was a strategic advisor, orchestrating deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I loved my job, not just for the money, but for the sense of control, the thrill of taking a chaotic mess of numbers and turning it into a perfect plan. It was an art, my passion. Then I met Claire Langston. It was at a financial seminar in downtown Chicago where I was invited to speak. I was discussing sustainable investment trends when I caught her gaze in the crowd. Claire stood out from everyone else in the room. She wasn't frantically taking notes or trying to ask questions to get noticed. She just sat there, listening with a confident, subtle smile. After the seminar, she approached me, not to talk about markets or stocks, but to challenge a quote I'd used in my presentation. "Do you really believe success only comes from what you create?" she asked, her tone bold yet not arrogant. I was captivated from that very moment. Claire was the daughter of Harold Langston, a small-time construction business owner in Springfield, Illinois. She was intelligent, sharp, but had a gentleness that made me feel I could be completely open with her. We started dating, and I quickly realized she was different from the women I'd met in the financial world, those who were often overly pragmatic or ambitious. Claire had dreams, but she also had a warm heart, always speaking about her family with a mix of pride and concern. She told me about Langston Construction, her father's company, drowning in debt and teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. "My dad won't admit it, but he needs help," she once said, her eyes filled with unease. I didn't know then that those words would change my life 2 years later. We fell deeply in love. After 2 years of dating, I proposed to her in a small Chicago park under a blazing sunset. Claire cried, nodded, and hugged me tightly. Our wedding followed soon after, a simple but heartfelt ceremony in Springfield, her hometown. I still remember the moment Claire walked in wearing her white wedding dress, her eyes sparkling as if the world existed only for the two of us. At that moment, I thought I was the happiest man alive. But happiness, as I've learned, often comes with unforeseen costs. Right after the wedding, Claire told me about the dire state of Langston Construction. The company wasn't just struggling. It was being crushed by competitors and suffocated by debt. Harold Langston, her father, was a stubborn, prideful man with an inflated ego. He would never admit he needed help, but Claire knew that without intervention, her family would lose everything. "Can you help, Braxton?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked into her eyes, saw the mix of desperation and hope, and knew I couldn't say no. So I made the biggest decision of my life. I gave up my 6-figure job, left Chicago, where I had built my reputation and career, and moved to Springfield, a small town I never imagined living in. My colleagues in Chicago were stunned. "You're insane, Braxton," a close friend said. "You're at the top of your game. You could be a director in 3 years." But I just smiled and replied, "Some things are more important than a career." I believed I could save Claire's family, and more importantly, I wanted to prove to her that I was willing to sacrifice for love. When I arrived in Springfield, reality hit harder than I expected. Langston Construction wasn't just struggling. It was a wreck. The financial records were a mess, contracts were being canceled left and right, and the employees were demoralized. Harold, my father-in-law, greeted me with a cold handshake and a scrutinizing look. "You think you can save this company?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. I didn't respond, just nodded and got to work. The days that followed were a grueling marathon. I stayed up all night analyzing data, renegotiating contracts with suppliers, cutting unnecessary costs, and finding ways to attract new investors. I called old contacts in Chicago, asking them to connect me with potential partners, and even flew out to meet banks to secure loan extensions. Every day I worked from before dawn until midnight, just to keep Langston Construction alive for one more day. At first, Harold was reluctant about my presence. He frequently interrupted meetings, questioning every decision I made with an irritated tone. "This might be fast, but are you sure it'll work?" he'd ask, even after I'd just convinced a major investor to inject capital. I bit my tongue, not because I feared him, but because I knew Claire was watching. I wanted her to be proud, to see that I wasn't just some big city finance guy, but a husband willing to do anything for her family. 7 years passed in a blur. I was 34, my hair starting to gray, my eyes no longer as bright as they once were. But Langston Construction had transformed completely. From a company drowning in debt, it had become one of the leading businesses in the Midwest, specializing in civic infrastructure and clean energy. $1 million contracts poured in, and the Langston name echoed in business conferences with respect. Harold, once a small-time owner buried in debt, was now a millionaire admired by the Springfield community. He appeared in local magazines, was invited to speak at events, and always boasted about the empire he had built. But not once did he mention my name. In his speeches at galas or in articles, Harold always spoke of his vision and the Langston family's efforts. I stood behind him in crowded ballrooms, smiling and clapping like everyone else, but deep inside, I felt a growing void. I had sacrificed my youth, my career, my big dreams to save this company. I had worked myself to exhaustion, turned down lucrative offers from Chicago, all to ensure Claire and her family didn't lose everything. And in return, I received not a single word of thanks, not one acknowledgement. Claire saw the injustice. Some nights when I sat alone in my office, she would come in, place a hand on my shoulder and say, "You're my hero, Braxton. My dad may not say it, but I know what you've done." Those words comforted me, but they couldn't fill the growing sense of loneliness. I began to wonder. I had given up so much, but was it worth it? I don't regret choosing Claire or her family, but standing in the office of Langston Construction, looking out at the quiet town of Springfield, I couldn't help but wonder, is this really where I belong? Have the sacrifices I made, the dreams I once cherished, faded into the silence of others? And then, when Evan Langston entered our lives, everything began to change. Not in the way I had hoped, but like a silent storm sweeping in, eroding the foundations I once believed were unshakable. Evan, Claire's younger brother, returned to the U.S. after 5 years studying business administration in England. I still remember the day he walked into Langston Construction's headquarters. Clad in a meticulously tailored navy suit, his hair slicked back, and a smile so confident it bordered on arrogance. Harold, my father-in-law, stood beside him, chest puffed with pride, introducing him to the entire office. "This is Evan, my son, the future of the Langston family, the one who will inherit this company." His voice boomed like thunder, and I, standing in the corner of the room, could only nod silently. suppressing the unease rising in my chest. I wasn't jealous of Evan. I had never sought to compete for anyone's spotlight. But the way Harold looked at his son as if he were the fulfillment of all his dreams made me feel like I was slowly becoming an outsider in the very house I had built. Evan was appointed vice president of operations just a few months after his return, a decision that sent ripples through the company. I wasn't surprised. Harold had always valued blood above all else, and Evan, with his prestigious degree from England, was his greatest pride. But what frustrated me was Evan's inexperience. He had never worked in the real world, never faced the pressure of million-dollar contracts or the long nights negotiating with investors. Yet Harold entrusted him with the company's biggest projects that had taken me years to secure through painstaking relationship building and proven success. "He needs a chance to prove himself," Harold told me in a private meeting, his tone leaving no room for debate. I nodded as I always did, telling myself I could guide Evan, help him integrate. But I was wrong. I approached Evan with good intentions. I invited him into my office, shared financial analyses, explained the intricacies of managing complex projects, and even offered suggestions on handling difficult partners. But every time I spoke, Evan would cut me off, his eyes glinting with arrogance. "I get it, Braxton," he'd say, his tone implying I was stating the obvious. "But I have my own way of doing things." His way, as it turned out, consisted of bold but impractical ideas, grandiose plans that sounded impressive but were utterly unfeasible. I tried to course correct, gently suggesting adjustments, but the more I tried, the more I realized Evan didn't want my help. He saw me as a controlling outsider, someone trying to impose authority on the Langston family's empire. Things took a turn for the worse when Evan began interrupting me in meetings. I remember one particular meeting with investors from Chicago, where I was presenting a plan to expand our clean energy projects. I had prepared for weeks, every number and chart meticulously calculated. But in the middle of my presentation, Evan suddenly stood up, cutting me off with a confident smile. "I think we should focus more on commercial projects like shopping malls. The market's hot right now, isn't it?" The room fell silent, the investor's eyes shifting from me to him, then back to me, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and said, "That's an idea, Evan, but we need to consider the long-term risks." I kept my voice calm, but inside it felt like a slap to the face. After the meeting, an old investor pulled me aside and whispered, "You okay, Braxton? Who does that kid think he is?" The company's employees also began to sense the shift. Those who had once worked side by side with me, who had witnessed me toil to save Langston Construction from the brink of bankruptcy, were now reassigned elsewhere, or even let go under the vague pretext of restructuring. I caught their glances in the long hallways of the company headquarters, eyes filled with regret, unease, and a quiet resentment they didn't dare voice. They wouldn't speak out, wouldn't challenge Harold or Evan, but I knew they felt the injustice just as I did. Then came the gala honoring Harold at the Springfield Business Conference, the final straw that broke the camel's back. I stood backstage in the shadows of the crowded auditorium, watching him step onto the podium to accept the Entrepreneur of the Year award. Harold, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, flashed a triumphant smile, holding the gleaming plaque high under the spotlight. The room erupted in applause, cheers crashing like waves. But as he began his speech, each word he spoke felt like a knife slicing into my heart. He talked about his vision, the Langston family legacy, and Evan, the future heir. Not a single sentence mentioned me, the man who had poured 7 years of sweat and tears into transforming Langston Construction from a crumbling wreck into an empire. I smiled and clapped along with the crowd, but inside, I felt a chilling emptiness. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just an outsider in Harold's eyes. I was being systematically replaced. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. That wasn't my way. Instead, I chose to stay silent and observe, like a chess player calculating the next move. I knew Harold and Evan would soon find a way to push me out of the company. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I didn't carry the Langston name. Rumors about Harold planning to hand the entire company to Evan were already circulating through the office, and every averted glance, every whisper behind my back confirmed it. I wasn't naive. I had seen the way Harold looked at Evan, the blind faith he placed in his inexperienced son, and I knew that if I didn't act, I would be crushed under their ambition. So I began building a contingency plan, not out of vengeance, but to protect myself. Every night after the office had emptied, I sat at my desk, meticulously collecting and backing up every critical piece of data from Langston Construction. Contracts, financial reports, audit records, everything was encrypted and stored in a private system only I could access. I reviewed every major transaction, saving receipts, digital signatures, and bank confirmations. I left no room for error. If the day came when Harold and Evan decided to eliminate me, they wouldn't be able to erase what I had done, or worse, frame me for their mistakes. Every file I saved, every number I verified was a brick in the wall I was building to shield myself from the storm that was coming. While safeguarding the data, I quietly maintained relationships with our major clients, people I had convinced, whose trust I had earned through countless handshakes and tense meetings. They didn't just work with Langston Construction because of Harold's reputation, they stayed because of me. "Braxton, you're the only one I trust in this outfit," a longtime partner from Chicago once told me over coffee. "Harold can brag all he wants, but you're the real brains." Those words, fleeting as they were, reminded me that I wasn't invisible, and I knew that if I left, they wouldn't hesitate to follow me. I reached out to Owen Blake, a financial lawyer I had worked with in Chicago. Owen was sharp, always saw through the noise, and most importantly, he understood me. In a late-night phone call, I told him everything about Harold, Evan, the rumors, and the injustice I was facing. "Braxton, you need an exit strategy," Owen said, his voice calm but resolute. "You've given them everything, but if they don't value it, you have to save yourself." Under Owen's guidance, I began building something I never thought I would: my own company. I named it Cole & Partners, a small firm specializing in investment consulting and corporate restructuring. On the surface, I let Cole & Partners operate as an auxiliary branch of the Langston Group, handling minor projects to avoid suspicion. But in reality, it was a strategic move to break free from the Langston family's control. I quietly registered the business, opened a separate bank account, and set up a small office on the outskirts of Springfield where no one would notice. Every step was calculated, like a move in a long chess game. I didn't want to confront Harold or Evan directly. That would only make things messy. Instead, I wanted a clean exit, a way to stand on my own 2 feet. More importantly, with Owen's advice, I embedded special clauses into Langston Construction's major contracts. These clauses reserved my rights to withdraw capital and intellectual property for the financial models I had designed. Models that had brought in millions for the company. If the company's structure changed or if I was forced out, those rights would automatically transfer to me or Cole & Partners. I didn't do this out of greed, but because I knew Harold and Evan wouldn't hesitate to cast me aside without acknowledging my contributions. I needed a shield, something to ensure that 7 years of sacrifice wouldn't vanish like smoke. Time passed, but not in a way that healed the cracks. It was like a slow river, eroding everything I once believed was solid. The tension within the Langston household grew thicker, like a taut violin string on the verge of snapping. Each day I felt the widening gap between Claire and me, not because we argued or were physically distant, but because of something intangible far deeper: trust. In the evenings when I returned home, Claire was still there, still cooking my favorite meals, still smiling when I walked through the door. But her smile had changed. It no longer carried unconditional warmth, but felt like a veil hiding something she didn't want to say. I began to wonder, did she truly understand what I was fighting for? Or had she long ago chosen to stand with her family? One October evening, after a particularly grueling meeting, I felt I could no longer stay silent. I drove home, resolved to have an honest conversation with my wife. "Claire," I began, my voice hoarse from the long day. "We need to talk." She looked up, setting her book down, and I caught a flicker of unease in her eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, but the emotions inside me surged like a wave I couldn't hold back. "I've tried, Claire. I've given everything to save this company, to make sure your family didn't lose it all. I gave up Chicago, my career, just to ensure your father and Evan could hold their heads high. But now I feel like I'm being pushed out of the very place I poured my sweat and tears into." I paused, waiting for her response. Claire sat still, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes fixed on the floor. I pressed on, my voice trembling with the emotions I'd suppressed for too long. "Your father doesn't trust me anymore. He monitors my every move, questions every decision as if I'm some outsider. And Evan, he's not just inexperienced, he deliberately disrespects me, dismisses everything I've done. I can't keep working in an environment where trust has been lost, Claire. I just can't." I looked at her, hoping for a spark of empathy, a sign that she understood what I was going through. But Claire remained silent far too long, until I felt my heart tighten. When she finally looked up, her eyes were no longer those of the woman who once held me and called me her hero. They were cold, unfamiliar, as if I were staring at a stranger. "Braxton," she said, her voice flat, "my father is just doing what's right for the company. And Evan, he deserves a chance to prove himself. He's family, you understand, don't you?" Her words cut like a knife, sharp and precise, piercing straight through my heart. I froze, not out of anger, but from a deeper pain, the pain of betrayal. Claire, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, the one I thought would always stand by my side, was now choosing her family over me. I opened my mouth, wanting to say something, to ask if the 7 years I'd given meant anything to her. But the words stuck in my throat, unable to escape. Claire continued, her voice now tinged with a cold edge, as if she were trying to convince herself. "You're being too sensitive, Braxton. You're part of this family, but you need to learn to accept your role. Not everything revolves around you." Those words hit like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they confirmed what I had long feared. In Claire's eyes, I was no longer the husband she once loved, but merely a piece in the larger puzzle of the Langston family. The conversation ended in heavy silence. Claire stood up and walked to the bedroom without another word. I sat there alone in the living room, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall, each sound like a countdown to the time I had left in this world. I got up, walked to my study, and closed the door to shut out reality. I had hoped that she at least would understand me, would stand by me when the world turned its back. But now I realized I was truly alone. The months that followed were a series of long, isolating days. I still went to the Langston construction office every morning, working with the precision of a machine, but the atmosphere around me had shifted. Employees who once respected me now spoke in curt sentences, their eyes avoiding mine. In meetings, my voice was drowned out by Evan's boasts or Harold's approving nods. I had once been the one shaping strategies, turning chaotic numbers into opportunities, but now I was merely a faded name in the meeting minutes. I felt the isolation tightening around me like an invisible noose around my neck, but I didn't let myself crumble. Every night in my small office, I reviewed my contingency plan, ensuring that Cole and partners, my encrypted files, and the relationships I quietly maintained were secure. I knew the worst was coming, and I had to be ready. On a gloomy Monday morning with a gray sky blanketing Springfield, I received an email from Harold. Just one line. "Meeting at 9 a.m. Boardroom. Don't be late." The tone was cold, devoid of explanation. I stared at the email, feeling like a soldier summoned to the gallows. I put on my gray suit, adjusted my tie in front of the mirror, and looked at myself. My face remained calm, but my eyes betrayed the invisible scars of the past months. I knew today would be the day of reckoning. The boardroom on the 12th floor of Langston Construction felt as cold as a tomb. Harold sat at the head of the table, his black suit accentuating his stern face, his eyes sharp as knives. Evan sat beside him in his familiar navy suit, a smug half-smile flickering on his lips. Claire was there, sitting across from me, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. Her head was bowed, her hands clasped tightly on the table as if she were trying to escape what was about to happen. Two of Harold's trusted board members, Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Carter, sat silently, their eyes fixed on the papers before them. The air in the room was heavy, as if everyone knew what was coming, but no one wanted to be the first to speak. Harold didn't make me wait long. He stood up, cleared his throat, and spoke in a voice as cold as ice. "Braxton, as of today, you are no longer part of the Langston Group." His declaration hit like thunder, but I wasn't surprised. I had seen this day coming for a long time, in Harold's suspicious glances, in Evan's arrogance, in Claire's silence. He continued, his voice steady but authoritative. "We need a new direction, a new vision. You've done well, but this company needs Langston blood to move forward." His reasoning was vague, rehearsed, a hollow speech meant to mask the truth. I was no longer welcome because I wasn't a Langston. I looked straight into Harold's eyes, unblinking. I felt no anger, no shock. Only a cold calm, as if I were standing outside my own body, observing from a distance. Evan sat there, trying to hide a triumphant smile, but I saw it glinting in the corner of his eye. Claire kept her head down, refusing to look up. I wanted her to meet my gaze, even just once, to know if she truly agreed with this decision. But she didn't. Her silence hurt more than any of Harold's words. I stood up, slowly adjusting my tie, and smiled. A faint smile, not out of joy, but because I knew I was ready. "Thank you for making it clear what you value more," I said, my voice deliberate, each word carefully carved. "Because soon you'll pay the price with exactly that." My words weren't loud or angry, but they were enough to make Harold pause. I saw him blink, a flicker of unease crossing his stern face. Evan frowned, as if unsure of what I meant. Claire at last looked up, but her eyes only briefly met mine before turning away. No one said another word. I walked out of the boardroom, feeling the weight of their stares on my back. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of my shoes on the wooden floor. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Everything I needed was in my contingency plan, the files, the relationships, Cole and partners. I had prepared for this day long ago, and now I just had to keep walking. At my desk, I gathered a few personal items: the watch my father gave me when I graduated college, the pen I used to sign Langston Construction's first major contracts, and the framed wedding photo of Claire and me. I looked at the picture, at her radiant smile from that day, and a sharp pain stabbed my chest. I carefully placed the frame in a box, making sure it didn't break, even though I knew what it represented had begun to crack long ago. Hazel, my longtime assistant, appeared at the office door, her eyes red. "Are you really leaving, Mr. Cole?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her, gave a faint smile, and said, "Sometimes to build something stronger, you have to let it fall first." She nodded as if she understood, but I knew she was also afraid for her own future in this company. I left Langston Construction's headquarters at noon, the harsh sunlight glinting off the company sign, a sign I had designed the financial strategy to keep standing. I walked away without looking back, though it felt like an entire chapter of my life was being left behind. But I had no regrets. I had done everything I could, and now I needed to do what was right for myself. From behind the glass window on the 12th floor, Harold watched my figure disappear down the sidewalk. I didn't see him, but I knew he was there, grappling with a mix of relief at having removed a threat and unease at the weight of my final words. The days after I left Langston Construction, Springfield remained as serene as ever. The maple trees blazed red under the autumn sun. The small streets buzzed with traffic, and the misty mornings still carried the scent of freshly cut grass. But inside the headquarters of the Langston Group, I could imagine the atmosphere shifting. Harold and Evan, basking in the confidence of those who believed they had won, likely thought everything was back on track. They believed that by removing me, they had cleared the path for the Langston legacy they so proudly championed. But they were wrong. I didn't need to be there to make them feel the weight of my absence. Just 1 week later, the first signs of trouble began to surface, like small cracks in a sheet of ice, signaling an impending collapse. I received a call from Owen Blake, my lawyer, one afternoon while I was sitting in the modest office of Cole & Partners, furnished with just a simple wooden desk and a few shelves stacked with documents. "Braxton," Owen said, his voice brimming with excitement, "do you know what's happening at Langston Group? Their major clients are holding off on signing new contracts. They're saying they need to reassess the company's leadership capabilities after your departure." I smiled, not out of spite, but because I had anticipated this. Partners like Mr. Jenkins of Midwest Energy or Ms. Larson of Green Tech didn't work with Langston because of Harold's reputation. They stayed because of me, because of the nights I stayed up perfecting contracts, the midnight calls to resolve crises, and the integrity I brought to every deal. I didn't do anything to provoke this shift. I didn't need to. The relationships I had built over 7 years weren't based on empty promises or flashy handshakes, but on trust. And now, with me gone from Langston Group, that trust was beginning to abandon them. Several key investors who had poured millions into the company's projects started pausing their funding. "We need more time to review," they said. But I knew the real reason. They didn't trust Evan's capabilities, and they no longer saw Harold as a reliable anchor. Langston's cash flow began to stall, like a river blocked by an invisible dam. Meanwhile, I received unexpected emails from former partners. One morning, while reviewing numbers at Cole & Partners, an email from Ms. Larson arrived. "Braxton," she wrote, "thank you for everything you've done for us over the years. If you have any new projects, let me know. I'd like to work with you directly." Those brief, heartfelt lines were like a ray of light in the gloom. Another partner, Mr. Jenkins, even called me directly. "Where you go, I follow," he said, his laugh ringing through the phone. "Harold can be as self-important as he wants, but you're the one who made things work." I thanked him, keeping my voice steady, but inside I felt a quiet validation. I wasn't as invisible as Harold and Evan thought. At Langston Group, I heard that Evan was throwing a tantrum. "This is a conspiracy," he shouted in a meeting, according to Hazel, who still sent me discreet updates via text. "Braxton is trying to sabotage our reputation." He blamed me, accusing me of turning clients and investors against them. But the truth was, I didn't need to do that. I just did my work as I always had, and the world began to adjust to the truth. Harold, on the other hand, didn't show his anger publicly. But I knew he was worried. Things took a turn for the worse when an article appeared in the Springfield Business Journal. The bold headline read, "Langston Group falters after strategic advisor Braxton Cole's departure." The piece, written by a sharp reporter named Ellen Carter, didn't hold back. Braxton Cole, widely regarded as the mastermind behind Langston Group's revival, left the company in a controversial decision, the article stated. Sources say Cole was the true architect of the major contracts and financial strategies that lifted Langston from the brink of bankruptcy to a leading regional player. His departure has left partners and investors questioning the company's future. I read the article in my small office, a cold coffee cup on my desk, and felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because I wanted to see Langston collapse, but because at last, the truth was being acknowledged. According to Hazel, Harold flew into a rage when he read the article. He summoned the PR team, ordering them to silence all rumors and even threatening to sue the paper for defamation. But the more he tried to suppress it, the faster the news spread. Other articles began popping up online, business forums started buzzing, and the name Braxton Cole became a topic of discussion more than ever before. Meanwhile, I said nothing. I didn't need to. I just worked as I always had at Cole & Partners. Within just 3 weeks, Cole & Partners secured 3 major consulting contracts. One of them was with Midwest Energy, Langston Group's biggest partner for the past 5 years. When Mr. Jenkins signed the contract with me, he gripped my hand so tightly I thought my bones might crack. "You're the real deal, Braxton," he said. "I don't care about Langston's reputation. I care about competence, and you've got it." I smiled, thanked him, and went back to work. I didn't need to declare victory or retaliate publicly. What I did, my integrity, my professionalism, my competence, spoke for me. Clients began calling it the Cole effect. They said it was when someone, through sheer honesty and ability, tilted the market in their favor without needing to shout or boast. I wasn't sure I deserved the name, but I knew that every new contract, every handshake, was a testament to the fact that I was right not to let betrayal drag me down. Meanwhile, at Langston Group, things began to unravel. Evan, according to Hazel, grew frantic as revenues plummeted. Major projects were halted due to a lack of working capital, and employees started worrying about their future. Harold tried reaching out to long-standing partners, but his calls were met with polite rejections. "We'll revisit later," they said, but I knew they were waiting for something, or someone, else. For the first time in years, I knew Harold was afraid, not of me, but of the truth he had tried to deny. His reputation, his power, his legacy were teetering, and he could do nothing to stop it. I, meanwhile, remained silent. I didn't need to speak out or justify myself. My first counterstrike wasn't a media war or a loud lawsuit, it was the quiet assertion of my credibility and trust. Things Harold and Evan could never claim. I sat in the small office of Cole & Partners, looking out at Springfield's night sky, and for the first time in months I felt a sense of relief. Not because I had won, but because I knew I was on the right path. In the days that followed, I focused on building Cole & Partners step by step, contract by contract, handshake by handshake. My small office on the outskirts of Springfield became a hub for new ideas where I, along with my team, Mia, my enthusiastic new assistant, and a few other young employees, worked with a passion I hadn't felt in my final months at Langston Group. But while I was forging a future, the Langston Group, the empire I had once saved, was cracking from within, and those cracks were growing too wide to conceal. Just weeks after my departure, Langston Group plunged into a serious crisis. Hazel, who kept in touch through brief text messages, told me that key projects, ones I had meticulously strategized, were grinding to a halt. A highway construction project on the outskirts of Springfield was paused because the contractor refused to proceed without financial guarantees. A major clean energy project, once the company's pride, was canceled when the partner pulled out, citing a lack of confidence in the current leadership. Banks, which had once been generous with Langston thanks to my impeccable financial reports, now tightened credit and halted disbursements due to excessive risk. Hazel wrote in a message, "Everything's in chaos, Braxton. No one knows what to do." Langston Group's shareholders, who had once applauded Harold at lavish business galas, turned into unrelenting critics. They held emergency meetings demanding that Harold and Evan provide solutions or step down. "They say the company's losing control," Hazel relayed, her voice in the messages tinged with worry. "One major shareholder even mentioned your name, saying everything started falling apart after you left." I read her message, feeling a mix of strangeness and familiarity. I didn't want Langston to collapse, not because I cared for Harold or Evan, but because I thought of employees like Hazel who had sweated alongside me in the toughest times. But Evan, with his inexperience and ingrained arrogance, only made things worse. In a desperate bid to salvage the situation, he signed an investment deal with a high-risk partner, a shady financial firm from Chicago that I had warned Harold about years earlier. The deal, according to Hazel, was a disaster. The company lost tens of millions when the partner failed to deliver, leaving Langston with a new pile of debt and no capital to recover. Evan thought he was smarter than everyone, Hazel wrote. Now the whole office is panicking. The financial press wasted no time reporting without mercy. An article in the Midwest Business Review ran the headline, "Langston Empire Teeters, the Cost of Greed and Stubbornness." The piece painted Harold as a greedy, short-sighted leader who squandered opportunity by ousting the company's most critical asset, me. Braxton Cole, the strategic advisor who lifted Langston from the brink of bankruptcy to regional dominance, is now building his own empire with Cole & Partners, the article stated. Meanwhile, Harold Langston and his son Evan appear to be steering the company into an inescapable crisis. I read those lines in my small office, the desk lamp casting light on my face, and felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because I wanted Harold humiliated, but because the truth was finally laid bare. Those who had once flattered Harold, inviting him to speak at business events, now turned their backs without hesitation. Conferences and dinners in Springfield stopped sending him invitations. Hazel recounted how Harold once tried to attend a local event but was politely turned away with the excuse that the guest list was full. The man who had once stood on a stage holding an Entrepreneur of the Year award was now the subject of whispered mockery. The Langston Empire, as the press called it, wasn't just faltering, it was crumbling, and all of Springfield was watching. Claire, I knew, was beginning to see her father's mistake. Hazel told me that Claire often appeared in the office with weary eyes, trying to mediate arguments between Harold and Evan, but to no avail. Once she confided to Hazel, "My father was wrong to let Braxton go. I don't know how to fix this." When Hazel relayed those words to me, my heart ached. I wanted to be angry with Claire, to blame her for not standing by me, but I couldn't. She was caught between love and loyalty, and now she was watching her family fall apart. But for me, it was too late. I couldn't go back, not after what had happened. Inside Langston Group, the atmosphere grew increasingly suffocating. Employees were anxious, unsure if their next paycheck would arrive on time. Some senior managers who had worked directly with me began reaching out to Cole and Partners discreetly. One afternoon, I received an email from Tom Carter, a former project director at Langston. "Braxton," he wrote, "I can't stay here anymore. Langston is falling apart, and I want to work with you. Got a spot for me?" I responded immediately, inviting him to the office to discuss. Tom wasn't the only one. 2 other managers reached out, and I realized that Cole and Partners' reputation was spreading, not just because of me, but because of those who believed I could offer a better future. Meanwhile, Evan was spiraling out of control. Hazel said he grew volatile, shouting at employees during meetings, blaming everyone but himself. "He says the partners betrayed us," Hazel wrote, "but everyone knows the problem is him." Evan, with his blind confidence, had dug his own grave, and each misguided decision only deepened it. Harold, I knew, could see the collapse coming, but his pride wouldn't let him admit defeat. Hazel said he often sat alone in his office, his eyes vacant, staring at financial reports glowing red. Once she overheard him muttering, "I can fix this. I don't need him." But the truth was, he couldn't. He had bet everything on Evan, on the Langston legacy, and now he was paying the price. He believed he could still save face by fighting to the end. But that honor, I knew, was nothing more than a hollow shell, fragile as glass. As my work began to find its rhythm across town, the Langston Group was fracturing. Messages from Hazel became less frequent, but each one she sent was heavy with despair. "The company is collapsing, Braxton," she wrote in a late-night text. "Banks are refusing to release funds, shareholders are threatening lawsuits, and employees are quitting in droves." I read her message, my heart sinking. I replied, brief but sincere, "Hang in there, Hazel. If you need it, Cole and Partners will always have a place for you." But deep down, I knew she still held on to a faint hope of saving Langston, even just a little. Claire, I heard, was doing everything she could to keep her family from falling apart. Once Hazel overheard her tell a colleague, "I told Dad we needed Braxton. He has to fix this." When Hazel relayed those words to me, a dull ache spread through my chest. Not because I wanted to return, but because I remembered the Claire from the early days, the woman who looked at me with eyes sparkling with faith, who held my hand and called me her hero. But now, she was only trying to protect something that had already rotted, even though she knew deep down it was beyond saving. Harold, with a pride larger than the empire he had built, initially refused any suggestion of reaching out to me. Hazel said he once shouted in a meeting, "I don't need that guy. Langston Group is mine and I'll save it." But as banks began seizing assets, major projects were canceled, and shareholders threatened to pull their investments entirely, he had no choice left. Hazel texted, "They're coming to see you, Braxton," Claire convinced her dad. "But I'm not sure he'll swallow his pride." I read the message, feeling like a soldier preparing for battle. I wasn't surprised. I knew this day would come. That morning, Springfield was cloaked in gray, with a light drizzle blurring the vibrant red maple trees. I was in the Cole & Partners office reviewing a new contract with Midwest Energy when Mia knocked on the door. "Braxton, there are 2 people here to see you," she said, her voice hesitant. "They say they're Harold and Claire Langston." I took a deep breath, nodded, and said, "Let them in." My heart pounded, not out of fear, but because I knew this would be the final confrontation, not just with Harold, but with my past. They walked in, and the air in the small room immediately grew heavy, as if carrying the weight of all the years gone by. Harold, in a black suit now slightly rumpled, stood tall, trying to maintain his air of authority, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion and desperation. Claire stood beside him, wearing a gray coat, her hair neatly tied back, but her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying before coming here. I stood up, nodded in greeting, and invited them to sit at the small meeting table. "Harold, Claire," I said, my voice calm. "I didn't expect to see you here under these circumstances." Harold cleared his throat, but Claire spoke first. "Braxton," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "we need your help. Langston Group is collapsing. My father. We were wrong to let you go. You're the only one who can save this company." Her words cut like a knife. Not because they hurt, but because they came too late. I looked into her eyes, searching for the woman I once loved, but all I saw was helplessness and regret. Harold, sitting beside her, was visibly irritated by his daughter's admission of fault. He cut in, his voice low and strained, as if trying to reclaim control. "Braxton, I'm not here to apologize. But you know how to run this company. Come back, help us through this crisis, and I'll make sure you're treated fairly." His offer was hollow, lacking sincerity, as if he still believed he could command me as he once did. I sat silently, looking straight into Harold's eyes, then at Claire. The tension in the room was palpable, the sound of rain pattering against the window the only noise. "Harold," I said, my voice slow but sharp, "what Langston Group is going through is the consequence of your own greed and arrogance. You chose Evan, you chose your legacy, and you pushed me out. I gave 7 years to save this company, and you never once acknowledged it. Now when everything is falling apart, you come here and ask me to fix your mistakes." I paused, letting my words sink in. Harold's hands clenched, his face reddening, but he said nothing. Claire, her voice almost pleading, spoke again. "Braxton, please. I know we were wrong. I know I was wrong. But this isn't just my father's company. It's your work, the dream you built. You can't let it collapse." Her eyes glistened with tears, and for a moment I saw the Claire from long ago, the one who held my hand under a Chicago sunset. But then I remembered her cold gaze during that night's conversation when she chose her family over me. I shook my head, my voice soft but firm. "Claire, I did everything I could for Langston. But I can't save people who don't want to be saved. It's too late." Harold, unable to hold back any longer, slammed his hand on the table, making my coffee cup rattle. "Who do you think you are, Braxton?" he roared, his voice shaking with rage. "You're just a consultant, a hired hand. You think you can destroy me and my company?" He stood abruptly, pointing at my face, his cheeks flushed as if he might explode. "You'll regret daring to challenge me." Claire tried to pull him back, but Harold yanked his arm away, knocking over a chair in his fury. I sat still, unflinching, my voice steady. "Harold," I said calmly, "I didn't destroy Langston. You did." I pressed a button on my desk, calling security. 2 uniformed men appeared at the door, their eyes waiting for instruction. "Please escort Mr. Langston and Ms. Langston out," I said, my tone gentle but uncompromising. Harold shouted a few more insults, but I didn't listen. I only looked at Claire, who bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She said nothing more, silently following her father out of the office. Weeks after that chaotic meeting, news about the Langston Group swept through Springfield like a storm. One morning as I was reading the paper in the Cole & Partners office, a headline in the Springfield Business Journal caught my eye. Langston Group officially declares bankruptcy. The article detailed how the company could no longer meet its debt obligations, having lost all liquidity after shareholders withdrew their capital en masse. Banks, out of patience, seized collateral assets, from the company's downtown Springfield headquarters to its expensive construction equipment. Major projects like the highway development and the clean energy complex I had poured my heart into were abandoned mid-progress, leaving rusted steel frameworks under the autumn sun. The press called it the most catastrophic collapse in Springfield's business history, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of bitterness as I read those words. Not because I rejoiced in their downfall, but because I knew that behind the numbers and headlines were the lives of hundreds of employees now plunged into uncertainty. Harold Langston, once celebrated as Entrepreneur of the Year, became the focal point of relentless criticism. The articles pulled no punches, labeling him a living testament to arrogance and blind ambition. Harold Langston bet everything on his family legacy, an article in the Midwest Business Review remarked. But he forgot that legacy was built on the efforts of others, specifically Braxton Cole. I read those lines, a cold coffee cup in my hand, and felt an emptiness. I didn't want Harold humiliated, didn't want to see the world turn its back on him. But I couldn't deny that he had brought this fate upon himself. Evan, meanwhile, chose to flee. Hazel, who still sent me discreet texts, told me he left the U.S. just days after the bankruptcy declaration, taking with him the remaining funds in the company's account, an act that sent shockwaves through Springfield. He disappeared without a word, Hazel wrote. Harold nearly lost his mind when he found out. Evan's actions not only pushed Harold deeper into financial ruin, but also delivered a final blow to his pride. From a proud father, he became a man betrayed by his own son. I wasn't surprised. Evan had always taken the easy way out, and when everything collapsed, he lacked the courage to face it. After the ordeal, Hazel came to me carrying a carefully sealed envelope. She said it was something Claire had written but never had the courage to send. I held the letter for a long time before opening it. The familiar handwriting appeared, soft, careful, with a slight tremble in each stroke of ink. Braxton, I know you don't want to hear from me anymore, but I hope you'll read these words even just once. I can't bear it any longer. I've left the Langston mansion, the house that once symbolized my family's success, and I've filed for divorce. Now I live alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of Springfield. Every morning I wake up early to make coffee, look out the window, and try to get used to a life without my father, without Evan, and without you. I know I was wrong. Wrong for staying silent when you needed me most. Wrong for letting loyalty to my family blind me to what was right. But the worst part is that I don't know where to begin making amends. I don't have the courage to face you, to look into the eyes that once trusted me completely. I'm not asking for forgiveness, nor am I writing to justify myself. I just want you to know I miss you. Not because the love is still there, but because I miss who we used to be. When everything was still pure, when we believed that love alone could conquer anything. Wishing you peace, Braxton. I folded the letter and sat in silence for a long while. My heart ached, but not with the same pain as before. Perhaps because I had learned to accept that some wounds don't need to heal. They just need to close. Claire had chosen her path, and so had I. Our love, once radiant, was now a distant memory, like the flickering light of a street lamp in the rain, beautiful, fragile, and gone forever. Meanwhile, Cole & Partners grew stronger than ever. In just a few months, we signed 5 major contracts, from financial consulting for startups to restructuring for established businesses. Clients sought me out not just for Cole & Partners' reputation, but because they knew me. Braxton Cole, the man who always kept his word, who never let personal emotions interfere with work. I maintained my simple approach, no boasting, no flash. Every morning I arrived at the office in a plain dress shirt, sat at my desk and focused on numbers, strategies, and new dreams. Mia, my assistant, often teased me. "Braxton, you should get some press coverage. People are calling you a legend." I just smiled, shook my head, and said, "Legends don't need to be on magazine covers, Mia. They just need to do their job well." Many in Springfield began calling me the man who won without fighting. I wasn't sure I deserved the title, but I knew I had chosen to let go of resentment. I didn't forget the past, the sleepless nights for Langston, Harold's cold glares, or Claire's heartbreaking silence. But I didn't let them control me. True success, I told myself, isn't in revenge, but in no longer being bound by the past. Each day as I stepped into the Cole & Partners office, I felt that freedom, the freedom to be myself, to build a future that didn't depend on anyone's validation. One decision I made at the time was to acquire a portion of Langston Group's former assets. Not to gloat or seize control, but to create jobs for Langston's former employees. People like Hazel, who had worked tirelessly and didn't deserve to be abandoned. When Hazel received a job offer from Cole & Partners, she called me, her voice choked with emotion. "Braxton, I don't know how to thank you. You didn't just save me. You saved my faith." I smiled over the phone and said, "No need to thank me, Hazel. We're a team." And I truly felt that way. Cole & Partners wasn't just my company. It was my new family, a place where I could create value without suspicion or betrayal. As I look back, my story is not one of revenge or resounding triumph. It is a testament to the fact that justice doesn't require retaliation or loud proclamations. Time and truth, like silent allies, always find a way to reveal everything. I sacrificed a glittering career in Chicago, the reputation I had built, and even my love to help the Langston Group, to help Harold, Evan, and Claire escape the brink of bankruptcy. I poured my sweat, tears, and dreams into that company, only to watch their greed and arrogance destroy it all. But I didn't choose to respond with anger. I chose to walk away quietly and steadfastly to rebuild my life. Through that journey, I learned a profound lesson. A person's greatest strength lies not in power or wealth, but in their ability to remain calm and dignified in the face of adversity. There were moments, standing in the cold boardroom of Langston Group, hearing Harold declare my dismissal or seeing Claire's distant gaze, when I thought I might break. But I didn't. I stood firm, not because I was stronger than others, but because I believed my worth didn't depend on their recognition. I believed that in a world where people are quick to trample each other to get ahead, standing still and holding on to one's integrity is a greater strength than any other. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't need to. Harold, Evan, and even Claire each fell under the weight of the consequences they had brought upon themselves. Harold lost the empire he once proudly called his legacy. Evan, in his cowardice, fled the U.S., taking what little money remained and leaving his father in solitude. Claire, though she chose to live independently, carried a regret I knew she would never voice. They didn't need me to punish them. Life did that fairly and unyieldingly. I once thought silence was a sign of weakness, that I had to speak out to fight to prove I was right. But through my years in Springfield, I realized silence is not weakness. It is the mark of someone strong enough to no longer need to prove anything. When I walked out of that boardroom the day I was fired, when I refused Harold and Claire's pleas, when I built Cole & Partners from nothing, I didn't need to shout for the world to hear me. The contracts I signed, the handshakes I received, and the gratitude from clients spoke for me. The deepest lesson I drew from all of this is, justice doesn't come from anger, but from steadfastness and integrity. Life will always test us with loss and betrayal. There will be days when it feels like the world has turned its back on you, when all your efforts seem forgotten. But only those who keep their hearts pure, who refuse to let resentment or bitterness take control, can walk through without being consumed by darkness. I lost much, my career, my love, and a part of myself. But I didn't let those losses define me. I chose to stand up, not to retaliate, but to live true to who I am. When fame, wealth, and power fade, the only thing left is character. Harold once had it all, an empire, a family, a celebrated reputation, but he lost it to his arrogance. Evan thought he could conquer the world, but he fled when faced with failure. Claire, though I still held a small corner of my heart for her, let blind loyalty obscure the truth. I chose a different path. I chose to live with integrity, not just for others, but for myself. My story doesn't end with the smug satisfaction of revenge, but with the peace of someone who has reclaimed himself. Each morning as I step into the Cole & Partners office, I see my team, Hazel, Mia, Tom, and others, working with passion and trust. I see new contracts, projects taking shape, and clients who trust me not for fame, but because I am Braxton Cole. I look out at Springfield's skyline where sunlight filters through the maple trees, and I know I have overcome the darkness.